Hello, and welcome back to our conference, Walking Together. My name is Michelle Garlinsky, and I'm a sister of the Holy Names of Jesus and Mary. And I am also a member of the board of NAVFD. And it is my pleasure to introduce this next session, which is titled Young Adults Talking, the Church Today. And in this session, we have a wonderful format of a group of young adults who will be in conversation in a panel format and sharing their insights, sharing their reflections, their challenges, their joys about their experience of church today. And so, without further ado, I introduce to you our panelists. Renee Wilson, who is a student, an engineering student at the University of Alberta. Brad Sekundak, also a student in Edmonton at the University of Alberta. And Jason Segal, who is a young adult in Winnipeg and St. Boniface Archdiocese in young adult ministry and also ministering with development and peace. And our moderator facilitator is Taylor Martin, a teacher at St. Mary's Academy. And so here is our panel. Enjoy.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to the 2023 National Association of Vocation Information Directors Conference. Thank you to our panelists for joining us for what I'm sure will be a really exciting conversation today. So before we begin, I'm just going to introduce myself and share a little bit about the land that I'm currently on. My name is Taylor Martin. I will be the moderator for the panel discussion today. I'm currently situated on Treaty 1 territory on the ancestral lands of the Anishinaabe, Cree, Oji-Cree, Dakota, and Dene peoples, and on the homeland of the Red River Métis. This year's NAVFD conference is taking place in Edmonton. The city of Edmonton is in Treaty 6 territory, and many communities call Treaty 6 home, including the Cree, Dene, Anishinaabe, Saulteaux, Nakota Iska, Nakota Sioux, and Niitsitapi peoples. Our conference theme this year is Walking Together. So by acknowledging the truth of the land that we're on, we have an invitation and an opportunity to reflect on what we can do and what we do and how we can walk together in this journey of reconciliation. So our panel consists of an incredible group of young adults. They're here to share a little bit about who they are, how they view their role in the church, and how all vocations can walk together in challenging times. So I'm wondering if we can begin by just inviting each of the panelists to just take a moment to introduce themselves. So I'm going to get you to begin by sharing your name, where you're situated, and how you spend most of your time, and also whether you think pineapple belongs on pizza or not. Okay, so maybe Brad, I'll start with you.
Sure. So I'm Brad Sekundiak. Right now I'm in Edmonton, Alberta, at the U of A studying a Bachelor in Kinesiology. I'm originally from a small town just outside of Grand Prairie, Alberta, called Sexsmith, or some people might know it as the Diocese of Gerard McLennan. And I think that pineapple does belong on pizza. I quite like Hawaiian pizza. So.
Awesome, thank you. Renee?
Hi, I'm Renee. I'm currently in Edmonton as well, studying civil engineering at the University of Alberta. I'm originally from Lethbridge, Alberta. I spend a lot of my time studying, and I also love spending time with my friends and in the summer going on lots of hikes. And I do not think that pineapple belongs on pizza.
All right, controversial. Thank you. Jason?
Well, hi, everyone. So my name is Jason Segaili, and I'm here in Winnipeg, Manitoba. And for myself, I'm the regional animator for Development and Peace, the Canadian Catholic Organization for Development and Peace here in Manitoba and the Diocese of Thunder Bay. So that's mostly during the day. And then in the evening, I'm also the youth and young adult ministry leader at Mary Mother of the Church Parish in the Archdiocese of St. Boniface. Where do I spend most of my time? Most of the time I actually spend most of it actually in front of a computer, doing most of my work, and also traveling. In my work that I do with development and peace, I do a lot of traveling, speaking different schools and different parishes. So when people say that Manitoba is boring and flat, it is not. It is very dynamic and very beautiful. And so is the region of Thunder Bay. So it's such a privilege and an honor to be able to thank God for his creation as well during those times of travel. For me, I completely 100% believe that pineapple does belong on pizza. And if it could just have its own solo of just pineapple on bread as a pizza, even better. Even better. The fresher the pineapple, the better the taste. That's my opinion.
Wow, I can't even imagine a pizza with just pineapple on it, but okay, I respect that. So we're going to begin by kind of just diving straight into kind of the heart of this conversation that ties to the theme of walking together and truth and reconciliation. So over the last few years, especially, there's been a lot of conversation about the role of the Catholic school in establishing and maintaining the residential school system. And a lot of young people are asking themselves how they can possibly continue to stay in the church in light of this. So I'm wondering if everyone can just share a little bit about why is it that you choose personally to stay connected to the church in these times? So maybe I'll start with Jason.
Mm-hmm. Thanks, Taylor. For me, for myself, when I started hearing about the confirmation of the unmarked graves, it was a very, very hard time. It was a very hard time. A lot of us were still in isolation. It was still the moment of the pandemic. And for me, I also had a lot of friends that were Indigenous, that were Métis, etc. And for them, it was a very, very difficult time. Some of them identifying as Catholic, some of them who didn't identify as Catholic. But overall, it really did shake up the church. So I'll start off by saying how difficult of a season that really was and how difficult it still is today for the church. For myself, during that time, it was a very difficult time for me to really evaluate my Catholic identity. Someone who was born and raised in the Catholic Church, who has served the church for so many years, it made me realize at what point the institution had such a great failure. A great failure to be able to recognize, a great failure to be able to take any proactive action prior to the confirmation of the unmarked graves in Kamloops, to be able to really take action for that. I think for myself, growing up in the Catholic Church, we didn't really hear about residential schools. It was mentioned, here and there, but it didn't really come out to anything productive as to what the church will be able to take as proactive action. And so for me, it really put into question my relationship with the church. It really made me question the institution, the power of the institution of the church. It made me realize as well at what point society versus the church comes together for a dialogue. Are we coming together for a dialogue? Are we listening? Are we taking the time to be able to check in with our Indigenous brothers and sisters and elders and seeing where they're at in terms of where they would like to see the church in terms of healing and reconciliation, if that's even something that they want to see or desire. And so for me, it took a lot of time to be able to identify myself in terms of my Catholic identity. But I did wrestle with it. So I will mention that, I did wrestle with that a lot. It was also a very hard time because I know for a lot of my Indigenous friends, my Métis friends as well, who did identify as Catholic, for them, they needed to take a step away from the Catholic Church. Not necessarily for hatred of the Catholic Church, but especially for their own families, they just needed to take a step away. And for them, I also keep in prayer and an open ear to hear where they're at and to respect the space that they perhaps need. And to also support them in their healing that could look like what it could look like outside of the church as well. And so it's a very interesting time to be able to realize people's identity and their affiliation with the church. For myself, I've had the opportunity to receive training to be a Kairos blanket exercise facilitator. And so Kairos is a wonderful organization, a ecumenical organization that works towards a lot of efforts for reconciliation as well. And so many churches are involved with this organization. And with the Kairos blanket exercise, for myself being a facilitator, is allowing people to be able to go through an experiential learning of colonization. And so for me, remaining in the Catholic Church has actually allowed me to be able to bring this tool within the Catholic Church to be able to educate others about the negative effects of colonization that was brought forth from the government and as well as different church institutions, including the Catholic Church. And if we look at the calls to action, that is actually one of the actions brought towards church organizations, is actually to bring the information to be able to educate others on the effects of colonization and what that looks like, what that meant for the churches as well. It's a hard past, it's a dark past, but we must be able to acknowledge that past, to delve into that hardness, to face the truth, and then to walk together in reconciliation, to find solutions to be able to heal together. So for myself, I decided to remain within the Catholic Church to be that agent of change, to be that agent of social change. Ever since then, I decided, like, I don't want to just be a Sunday Mass person. I don't want to just be in the pew on Sunday. And, I have my work life, social life, and then, but Sunday is just a church day, right? My church day is 7 days a week, 24/7, and everything and in anything that I can do. And doing so in that way is being able to bring my faith into action. And I strongly encourage other people to do the same. It could be educating yourself. It could be maybe meeting an elder. If there's sharing circles that are available in your communities, to partake in that. To be able to read books that are both nourishing and educational on the topic of reconciliation is such a great way to be able to be connected. So those are one out of many ways as to why I decide to continue staying part of the Catholic Church, to be that agent of the change inside.
Awesome. Thanks for sharing. Renee, did you want to chat about the topic?
Yeah, well, Jason said it very well, that when all of this was coming out, like, it was definitely very difficult. And definitely hard to think about and process and just recognize where, I guess, my role was in all of this, what to do, what to think, really. But I think what's kept me in the church all this time is just, as a Catholic, I recognize that we are called to love everyone. And so just being able to love people for who they are and take those steps to aid in reconciliation and just move forward with the church, because although the past is very dark and difficult, I think we can take this as an opportunity to move forward. And also, I stay in the church because of the Eucharist and just my personal relationship with Christ. And I think, we just need to take more steps together. And I think that leaving the church wouldn't allow for those steps to be taken.
Great. Thank you. Brad?
So my journey staying in the Catholic Church and kind of taking it as my own faith. I guess, like, I was raised a cradle Catholic. Both my parents were Catholic, grew up going to church on Sunday, every Sunday, sometimes even daily Mass. And grandparents were both Catholic on both sides of the family. So, but there came a time in my life, probably around 16, where I really accepted that faith for my own and, decided that, like, yes, this is something that I grew up doing and have done it my entire life just because I was kind of supposed to. But once I really accepted it to my own, it just changed my outlook on life. And I really saw the beauty in everything and how that God is everywhere. And even in just the sunrise in the morning, how beautiful it is and how it could be without it, without God. So then came my university life, and right around that time, so that would have been 2019, 2020 was my first year. This is when all the unmarked graves and everything kind of started popping up. And especially in the world of academia, it made it really hard to identify as Catholic. Like, anyone you'd meet and they, if it comes up, oh, I'm Catholic, they're like, oh, how the heck are you Catholic? Like, you're terrible people kind of thing. And it was hard. It was really challenging to almost, I guess you could say, like, be a stereotypical white Catholic male. And like, it's just like you almost felt attacked, especially in the world of academia. It was quite hard. And that really challenged my faith. It really, I fell away from the church a lot. I stopped going on Sundays. And then, I mean, COVID hit too, and that didn't help. Mass was online, so it was even easier to just kind of put it on the back burner. But now again, I feel like we're really working towards that reconciliation. It's becoming easier to identify as Catholic again, and to be open about that faith. And it's really helped along the whole way, having this community of friends and family that are also Catholic, and just to have that support group to kind of, push you along the way. And yeah, like my roommates here, they're great. We've even done music at mass on Sundays occasionally, and I guess really it's just that sense of community that has kept me in the church, and just seeing God's beauty in absolutely everything. And yeah, there has been challenging times, and like Renee said, the past is dark, and like Jason also said, the past is dark, but the future can be bright, right? Uh, when we do get to the point where we can all walk together and live a life in harmony, that's the day I long for.
Awesome, thank you. So a couple of you had mentioned being raised in the Catholic Church from the time you were little baby. I'm wondering, as young Catholics, as young adults, what is it that you think some older Catholics, your parents, grandparents, or others in your life don't understand about what it's like to be a young Catholic? Renee, did you want to start?
Yeah, sure. I think what a lot of older people don't understand about being a young Catholic is just how difficult it is to live in the secular world while also being a Catholic. And there's so much pressures and noises and voices from everywhere, even more than before, just because of the media and how quickly information gets around, and how much misinformation can be spread around, and just and so I think older people have to be more patient with younger people, and realize that faith is a journey and not something that everyone is going to understand right away, because especially with a lot of misconceptions about the church, it can be hard as a young person when you're on social media or talking to other people and people are making assumptions about the church and you're not educated as much on what the faith truly teaches. And so you can hear a lot of outside voices. And also, I think older people need to recognize that it's not going to come easy, and that the faith needs to be taught more prevalently, and just we need to understand what it is truly about instead of hearing from all over and being judged before we even are given a chance to take steps into the faith.
Great, thanks. Brad?
Yeah, I think Renee said it very well. It's hard to understand what the generation before us experienced growing up Catholic and in the Catholic faith, but it's hard for them to understand what we're going through as well in the secular world, and this world that just constantly seems to come at religion. Doesn't matter what the religion, that there's just something everywhere that's kind of against it, or and it is really a journey that everyone has to take their own journey, their own way. They have to make their own path, right? It's like with anything, right? The previous generation, or like, we won't understand what our kids or our grandkids will go through growing up in the Catholic faith. And yeah, it's hard to kind of articulate what they might be going through, because we don't really know what they went through or what they're going through as much. But yeah, like Renee said, I think everyone just has their own journey, and we need to kind of embark on that. And they're just less judgment, like she said, I guess, as well. So yeah.
Thank you. Jason?
Yeah, so for me, I grew up in a very 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 Filipino culture here in Winnipeg. So I was born here, but my parents are from the Philippines, and so for me, there's always been this struggle growing up as growing up as a cradle Catholic. You'd always go to mass every Sunday. You'd have like your little like Jesus statue. You'd have like your little like Mary statue over here, rosary dangling on this side in this car, and so sometimes like I think a lot of people who grew up very culturally, like they're both cradle Catholics, but and also very culture Catholics, right? They kind of grew up going to mass, but they didn't actually like really understand like what was actually happening. And so for me, what I've noticed coming from more of a specific cultural background is that I think there's a lot of people who grew up with the faith. It was kind of just given to them, but they didn't really understand exactly kind of the basis of their faith. And so for me, that's kind of how I grew up. I was very exposed to all these like baby Jesus statues. I mean, there's a Mary statue right behind me right now, and I found those really beautiful when I was growing up as a child. We'd pray from time to time as well. But then I guess when it came to my teen years, you really started to question for yourself. I mean, like, what's really happening at Mass? Right. And then you kind of really question like, why is it that we only have male priests? What's the role of women when it comes to leadership as well? So when you started having those deeper questions, I think for me that was when it kind of sparked, where it was like not just a cultural thing that, oh, I have to go to mass to please my parents, but I actually have to go to mass because the Lord is truly present in the Eucharist, right? And so for me, it really ended up becoming more of a deeper exploration, which then led me a lot deeper into ministry afterwards. But it really took a lot of like deep reading, a lot of deciphering, like what's culture, what is Christ, especially when it came to, discussions of like mental health, when it came to questions of what does the church actually teach on LGBTQ plus issues, etc. Because when you grow up in a very specific culture, a lot of it can be filtered with a lot of dismissive statements. For example, like on terms of like mental health, just pray it away. The Lord's got you. Just pray it away. It will. The Lord is there for you. Without kind of maybe perhaps addressing specific things that can be in addition to having a mental health counselor plus prayer, etc. Right? So kind of these conversations of mental health as well kind of got a lot deeper for me when it came to understanding what does the Catholic Church actually say about our mental health. There were also a lot of different conversations when it came to LGBTQ plus issues. Growing up in a culture that was very conservative and very conservative in that sense. A lot of conversation towards LGBTQ plus community was extremely hateful, and not founded on any theology of how do I say of love, of understanding that they still have dignity, etc. It's one thing to understand the sanctity of marriage between man and woman, but then to start conversing about the LGBTQ plus community in such a hateful way is different, right? And so that is something that to decipher between culture and between the teachings of Christ and His Church, and to understand that. So for me, it was very much a learning journey to be able to know and to appreciate my culture, but to also understand that scripture and the teaching of the church is so important, and that also needs to be explored as well without having our own personal or cultural biases in it.
Great, thanks for sharing. I think I agree with you that crossover between culture and faith can be so blurry for me in the Italian community as well. So I appreciate it. Brad actually mentioned this earlier, the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic on your own personal faith journey. I'm wondering if I can hear a little bit more from the three of you about how you feel the COVID-19 pandemic affected the role of young adults and young Catholics in the church. Maybe, Brad, do you want to start since you were kind of bringing that up earlier?
Yeah, sure. So my experience with it, Like I said, mass went online. There was no more of that participation, and I feel like this is going to be pretty a common theme among probably everyone, and not even just us three. But there wasn't that participation. It made it almost too easy to put it on the back burner and maybe to just sit in the living room and watch a mass on TV. It just wasn't quite the same, at least for me. And then when we did get back into the church, like you could only have one person singing, or there was no music at all. It was just instrumental. There was nowhere for a lot of young people to participate. Even in our student-led mass at St. Joe's College, which is on the U of A campus, there was not really much opportunity for people or young people, any people, to participate in the mass, and it still just made it less enjoyable to go. Really had to be faith driven to be there. um, it just really made things more difficult. We persevered through, and it was great. But yeah, my experience personally was that we wanted me and my roommates were all very musical. We wanted to start doing mass on Sundays, and this was last year. And we couldn't. Well, we could, but only one person could sing at a time, and the other two would just play instruments. And then it was kind of like, well, we all want to sing, or none of us want to sing, kind of thing, right? So that also made us kind of walk away a little bit, and because there was just not that participation. There was also things like out of church activities, like they did Alpha. I don't know if anyone's familiar with Alpha. I know, Renee, you probably are, but they canceled it. I think the one semester, I could be wrong. And then the next semester, it was like smaller, and there wasn't as many people, and I couldn't even make it because it was over like the lunch hour instead of in the evening with a meal and stuff like that. And it just made it harder to be part of that community. And the Catholic community in particular, is something that really has kept me in the faith and around the church. And COVID just really took away that sense of community and made it much harder to participate in the church.
Thank you. Renee?
Yeah. Personally, COVID-19 was very difficult for me. With my faith, I've been blessed with an amazing family who is very strong in their faith. And so we watched Mass online, and it didn't feel the same, but thankfully I was kept in that. But I did see a lot of people that I know fall away from going to Mass or start to question what they believed and turn to other forms of religion or other things and it was very difficult to see that, because in isolation it's hard to walk with people in their journey of faith as well. It's also difficult to see that after COVID, a lot of youth ministry, especially where I'm from, it wasn't like started up again. Like they didn't have the resources or the financial ability to do it anymore, and so young people were less involved in the church. And I think it's started up again a little bit more, but it's not the same. And yeah, it's hard, because after the pandemic, you see a lot less younger people in the church. And yeah, for me, it was difficult because when you're isolated, you don't have that community to walk with you in your faith. And so there was times where it was just convenient to not think about my faith, not pray, not dive deeper into my faith. And I think a lot of people can speak to that. I also think that after the initial pandemic started to settle down a little bit and things like vaccines were introduced, there's a lot of division in the church. And I think that had a lot of younger people questioning their faith just because of different things that were being said by different groups in the church. And yeah, I think I think everyone has their personal struggles with it, and in faith we're called to live in community with one another, but isolation didn't help that. So yeah.
Thank you. Jason?
Oh man, there's so much to unpack from the past 2.5 2 years. Oh my goodness. So I mean, for me personally, I mean, first and foremost was that our whole family got ill during COVID. So for me, I was in my final year of my teaching practicum, and it was report card season. And I just remember getting super sick, but it was 2 days before the due dates of the report card. So here I am teaching online, waiting for my COVID result. And here I am, super flushed, high fever, sweating profusely, trying to finish all these report cards. Some students didn't really give something. So I was just like, well, there's a number now. And so it was such a stressful and frustrating time for myself. So I was really ill during that time when COVID happened. I'm now okay. But my sister got really sick after. A week after, she got really, really sick. She actually had to drop out of her nursing schooling in university. She was already 2 years in. So she had to drop out because she ended up having really bad migraine issues. So she actually couldn't lift her neck for many months, actually. So that was really hard for our family. So that was another weight on our family in terms of helping each other, on our faith as well. And the year afterwards, both my parents got really sick. They were 1 day short of receiving their vaccine. And on the day that they were supposed to receive their vaccine, they actually got super, super sick. So I remember actually having to bring my parents to the same hospital in the same day, only 6 hours apart. And it was a really hard time. I actually almost lost both of my parents actually to COVID. And so it was a very hard time. I mean, financially, faith-wise, I mean, work-wise. So yeah, so I just started my new position, and there were so many things that were happening at that time that I didn't really have time to think about faith. It was just more kind of like survival at that point. So my parents, after spending a month in the hospital, they were fine. They came back. But it was a very, very difficult time for all of us in the family. I mean, especially for myself, I was also in a role of I was also in a role of ministry. And so having to do ministry online was also very difficult. Being able to kind of do online mass was really hard. I mean, people barely showed up, and you know what? I don't blame them. It was really hard to be able to be animated online. People's Wi-Fi, such as mine right now, were kind of choppy. People's dogs were walking everywhere. People brought their dogs with them, which was super fun. And so it was very, very hard to be able to not only serve my family, but then to also serve in ministry. And I think for a lot of us being young people during a pandemic, I was in a full existential crisis. Like, who am I? What is my future going to look like? Am I going to die right now? It was such a mind-boggling time. So I would kind of describe it a little bit like a tornado, like an existential tornado of really questioning my identity and my faith. Being able to question my identity in terms of being a son and brother, in terms of serving my family, question my identity in ministry. Like, do I just pause? Do we just throw off ministry now and then come back later? Is that, so it was just such a difficult time. So I really am very thankful for technology. One of the fruits of the pandemic, and it was actually one of the days where the pandemic was officially declared in Manitoba. I think, Taylor, you and I were actually doing a school presentation, and that was actually the last day. On that Friday, when everything closed, we had a fundraiser at the church, and so we had to close everything. The popcorn machine just arrived, and so we had to return it back to the FedEx to get it sent back. And then a car backed up into me, and it was like, oh my goodness, what's happening? And so, during all that chaos, one of our young adults in our group said, Jason, let's do an online rosary. Let's do an online prayer group. And I was like, ugh, like online, I don't really know like how that works. So we tried to find this was like pre-Zoom era, right? And so we tried to put something on, and it started off with 4 people joining an online rosary to pray. And then it grew to like 20, 24 people kind of joining online, to the point where they wanted to do this every single day, like 365. And I told them, like, you know what, this is a ministry that's being born of its own, that I need to pass this on to somebody else. So I actually asked, our prayer ministry was actually born out of that, along with our young adults. And now it's an online rosary group at 9 p.m. every single day, including New Year's Day. That was actually birthed out of the pandemic. So oddly enough, even though we were so isolated, and due to certain protocols, we couldn't see each other, there was this birth of a beautiful part of our faith which came alive, which was prayer. And thanks to technology, that there was a way as to how we were able to do that. So even though there were some hardships, there were some silver linings, some blessings that the Lord also planted throughout those difficult times.
Great, thanks for sharing. So that actually kind of moves on to the next topic of conversation, which is, I mean, we've been talking about some of the dark times in the church, and some of the negative things that have been happening, for young adults in particular. I'm wondering if there's anything over the last few years. We're kind of in a time right now of transformation and change. What can we do, as young adults to kind of encourage more participation, and utilize the tools that we've been given, to increase participation for young adults in the church? Renee, did you want to share?
Yeah, so sorry, the question is, what can us as young adults do to help bring other young adults into the church? Or
Yeah.
I think the biggest thing that we can do is just be a witness of the faith, because you can tell people, oh, like, come to this, come to that, and they will be like, oh, great, that's great, but then they don't show up because they're like, oh, they have better things to do with their time. So I think it's really about developing our own personal faith and our relationship with Christ, and letting that letting Christ use us, to shine through to everyone else, to bring them in, because like a witness of joy can be so powerful, because people are like, oh, I want what they have. And then you're like, oh, like, just come to Mass or come to this youth event or things like that. And then that gives them a chance to have their own personal encounter with Christ, and hopefully bring them in. But yes, it's definitely it's a difficult question, because there's not a whole lot we can do per se. But it's just finding the right way to go about the small things that we can do.
Thank you. Brad?
Yeah, so I think Renee said it very well. All we can really do is lead by example and be a witness, right? That's what God calls us to do, is be a witness of his love and to others. And by this leading by example, participating in Mass as much as we can, and then outside of Mass, just being that picture of faith, is really the best thing I believe we can do, as young adults, as Catholics of the faith, and to bring people, of not just other young adults, but older adults or young kids or whatever, to bring anyone to the faith, is just to be a witness, like Renee said, to be a witness.
Thank you. Jason, did you have anything you wanted to add?
Yeah, I mean, I totally echo with what Brad and Renee were saying, that importance of being a witness first and foremost of our own faith, and then to share that. I think for me, like, one of the other, I guess, like, thoughts that came to mind is meeting the young people outside of the church. I think sometimes we have this tendency, and I know for myself, that's my point for myself to work on when it comes to ministries. I always think that they have to come inside the church doors. But sometimes I'm starting to realize now that it's like, well, a lot of them are not in the pews. A lot of them are not actually in the church. So where can I meet them that's not the church, where I can still speak about faith, share my testimony of faith, like what Brad and Renee said, but meeting them where they're at. I think for me, that's been such a huge theme when it comes to reaching out to other people and just, just seeing where they are. It doesn't have to be like me with my, big Jesus luggage bag thing and like sprinkling that on them, but it can just be simply be, like, hey, like I haven't seen you in such a long time. Like, let's go for a coffee. Or hot. I don't drink coffee. I just say that because it's common, but I actually always order a hot chocolate. But like going out somewhere where it's not in the church setting, and then just being able to catch up. And for me, that's where like the best and the most deep conversations actually happen. Is when you're out for a coffee, for beer, for burgers. I mean, whatever it is, like there's just something so so communal in sharing around food, right? I mean, for me, I think about different images of Jesus. When I think of Jesus on the walk to Emmaus, right? I mean, he's there with the two with the two, and they're breaking bread together, right? And they realize like, oh my gosh, Jesus, and then he's like, boom, paf, like I'm gone, But just like that moment where they shared together so intimately, they were so intrigued with his conversations along the way that they wanted to invite him to their own home. And so for me, the Jesus on the walk to Emmaus has been so powerful when it comes to reaching out to people. They were going to different directions, leaving Jerusalem, and there was so much chaos and movement, but he met them, in their movement. He didn't redirect them. He met them, in their movement of where they were going, and he was present with them. So for me, that was such a beautiful, beautiful passage, when we look at scripture in that sense. There's another image for me, and it's Jesus knocking on the door. I don't know about you, but for me, I don't know if it's a millennial thing, but I panic every time somebody calls me like on my phone, or I don't know. But then so like sometimes I'll just like wait for them to just like finish the phone call, wait until my blood pressure kind of like drops a little bit, and then hear the voice message and kind of see like, oh my gosh, like, if this is an emergency or can this be a text message, I don't know if people agree with me, but I guess that's just me. Right? Okay. So thank you. I feel affirmed. And so, sometimes reaching out to people in many different ways, that could be like sending them a message, sending them a text message, For me, sometimes I just like send them like funny videos on Instagram that have like pseudo Christian themes in them, right? And like you send like the wink emoji in it. Those are really cool ways, I think, of just like engaging, with them in ways where it's not too, super hardcore, like evangelizing in a sense, where you just want to meet them where they're at. So, I think of that sense of knocking, not in a way that's annoying, but in a way that's always invitational. Is my Wi-Fi, am I back again?
You're good. Yeah.
I'm good. Yeah, you can do Zoom calls with people too if your Wi-Fi is great. Not like mine. But I just wanted to reiterate in case it was cut off, but that sense of the knocking not as annoying, but as invitational. I think Christ is always representing that knock as an invitational knock. If someone ignores you, is there another way to be able to reach out to them? Give them space, do another reach out. I think for me too, it's also the sense of not giving up, but also keeping them in prayer. Sometimes like when you reach out and they're like, why are they not answering? Like, why are they not coming? This is such a good event. Like, we're going bowling, like we're going like to like a paint night. I mean, I enjoy those, but sometimes maybe other people don't, right? It's also to be open to the Holy Spirit and to be open to the way as to how he's also guiding. It's so funny how sometimes, you'll be praying or thinking about somebody to reach out to, and then you're like, oh, like, where should we meet them? Like, should this be in a cafe or should this be doing this activity? And then boom, like you're just at the grocery store and you meet them. And then you're just having a conversation about life and you're meeting each other. I never thought I'd meet somebody, that you were meaning to reach out to and you were at Superstore or Costco, So just being open to the promptings of the Holy Spirit in terms of invitation, I think is also important to be able to encounter with our encounters with other people as well.
That's great. Thanks. That road to Emmaus is such a beautiful example and image for the theme of walking together. So I appreciate that. So I want to transition now, because I recognize we're kind of 2/3 through our panel here, to a conversation about vocation, because we are at the NAVFD conference after all. So I'm wondering if you can share a little bit about the ways in which you see the different vocations are walking alone right now, and how you envision vocations walking together on this journey of truth and reconciliation. How is it that we can bring everyone together and share our experiences in this journey? Maybe let's start with Brad.
Sure. It's kind of a tough question. It's loaded, and I don't have a ton of experience with, well, much of any vocations. I'm engaged. I'm not quite married yet, so I mean, can't hit that front. I've never been a priest. I've never been a nun. I've never been a bishop or a cardinal or a pope. So, can't really speak on any of those points too much. But I think you can kind of see this, for me anyways. I've wrestled with being called to married life and this call, and kind of the fact that it almost doesn't seem as significant as a call to holy orders, and that it almost seems that like there's this hierarchy of vocation. And I brought this up with Archbishop Richard Smith here of Edmonton. I asked him the question there the other night. He came and did a talk at St. Joe's College at U of A, and I asked him, and he put it very beautifully that like there is no hierarchy. There's no one vocation is better than the next, and it really struck me. I was like, really? Like that's not the way I've ever seen it, or like, and I mean, no one's ever told me that like, oh, if you're a priest or that's the right way, but if you want to get married, then that's okay. But that's the way it's always seemed. And I guess that's one way that it seems divided, is that, I could be wrong, but I feel as though a lot of people have the same opinion, that it seems maybe when you aren't, giving your life fully to God and taking a vocation of holy orders, that it's less significant than a life to the married life. And just another way to kind of bridge the gap between kind of the common man, if you will, and or woman, man or woman, sorry, but the common man or woman and like the holy orders especially, is to like do things like when Archbishop Richard Smith came to St. Joe's and gave this talk. He's with the people, he's answering our questions. It was so amazing to see a man, a bishop that you think like, oh, this guy is like, one of the pictures of God, and he's just there as a person. Like he's laughing and telling us about how he took a commerce degree, and it's things like that. Like other than that experience, I've never had an experience like that with with a priest or a bishop or a nun or a deacon or anything really. I kind of had that personal engagement with a member of the holy orders. So I guess that would just really be a way to bridge the gap, is to have these events or talks, or coffee time, or I don't drink coffee either, Jason, so hot chocolate time, nap time. Coffee. Yeah. So I mean, whatever works, just to reach out into the community, to be with the people. I feel like there's a divide in that sense.
Awesome. Thank you. Jason.
Yeah, so I mean, for me, it's been a few years of quite interesting times, I think, of exploration in my vocation. I mean, I won't go into like all the detail, because that could be a long thing to also go into. But for me, there was a lot of beauty of I was in a relationship, and so it was really beautiful, with the woman that I was with, to be able to explore the vocation of marriage. Unfortunately, our relationship didn't continue, so it had to stop. And so for me, it kind of led into this other door of like exploring the vocation of the priesthood. And so actually this past summer, I actually explored the vocation of becoming a Jesuit priest. There were such beautiful charisms of being a Jesuit that I was like, you know what, like in this fruitfulness of singleness, I have nothing to lose but so much to gain in being able to just become closer to Christ. in this beauty of the vocation of the priesthood. And like, what does that mean? What does that really like signify? Earlier I was talking about being culturally Catholic, right? Coming from a very Filipino family, like family is like the number one thing, and I'm sure it's the same theme for so many other cultures as well. So when I told them that I would be looking into this, both my parents were like quasi supportive, but also kind of like, who's going to take care of you when you're old? Who's going to take your insurance? Like all of these things about like insurances and like, like who's going to take care of you when you're sick? What about the new generation? Who's going to pass down the last name? Like all these things that are also associated with our culture and our society that I was like, I told my parents, I was like, no, you know what? I'm ready to just like throw those away for the sake of responding to God's call if that is what he wants. And let me tell you, long story short, just to summarize that 1 week come and see, it was one of the most powerful and the most beautiful experiences that I ever had, which was to explore that vocation with them. There was incredible healing on my end. There was incredible ways as to how the Lord was able to speak to me. And I guess one of my points that I wanted to share is that I think for young people, I think we should also normalize giving opportunities for people to explore their vocation. For me, the Jesuit order was very common. They had a lot of charisms that I was very interested in, like young people, education, reconciliation, etc. Works of justice. But there's also beautiful orders that have different charisms in them. Some of them are more contemplative, right? So if somebody has a spirit of prayer, has this really deep call to dedicating their whole life in prayer, what are those religious groups that I could be able to connect them with, right? So I think as young people, you don't have to be a youth minister or a vocations director to be able to know who those groups are. But as young people, and people who are leading other people, to know who are those people in my community that I could also be able to bridge them with, and to pray to be able to have people presented along your path, to be presented, to be able to introduce them to other people as well. I guess another thing that I would add on is to normalize spiritual direction. Honestly, did not know what that was until this past summer, since I was wrestling with both, the vocation of the priesthood and married life, and kind of like, what does that mean? Having some trauma from a breakup, it kind of like delusioned myself a little bit on marriage. Do I really want to be married? But then you also had a lot of things that were happening within this church institutionally. You question like, do I really want to be part of that? So there was a lot of things to kind of like unpack that way. And praise the Lord that I was able to kind of be guided to be able to find a spiritual director. So my spiritual director is actually a religious sister, who I'm able to kind of have as like my go-to. Priests are great, but I know that priests are also really busy. And so being able to normalize spiritual direction, like what is spiritual direction, knowing who to contact as a group of spiritual directors. That could be a religious priest, that could be a religious sister, that could be a lay person who's formed in spiritual direction. There's a cool pocket of people, scattered within the community, to be able to connect them with that and to have someone to hold you accountable on your journey, and the messiness and the joy of your journey, I think is so beautiful. And so if I were to go back in time, I wish I had a spiritual director much earlier, I think, in my earlier young adult years. And my last point I wanted to share is to be able to frequent, I don't know if that's the same thing in English, but anyways, from French, like fréquenter, to be able to give the opportunity for people to receive the sacraments through adoration, through confession, through various forms of spirituality, which are such beautiful gifts in our Catholic Church, to be able to give them those opportunities. It can be just, talking to your parish priest or chaplain and saying like, hey, like, can we just organize like a young adult like worship night? Can we just organize, just a beautiful like adoration night? Can we organize, a speaker on vacation? That too, or, on vocations, to be able to come speak to us about the beauty of vocation, right? I see like the smaller the groups are, the more fruitful the conversations and the more impacts that you can have. It's beautiful in our communities to be able to have large groups, large conferences, but sometimes our sense of community can be lost. So even starting that at the grassroots level, I think is so beautiful.
Awesome. Great ideas. Thank you. Renee?
Yeah. a lot of what I thought Brad and Jason said very well. I definitely think that there's a lot of separation in like the hierarchy of vocations, as Brad was speaking about. And so I think it is important for priests and religious especially to just not stoop down to the level of a layperson, if that makes sense, but just to like meet us where we're at, and and just show the human aspects, because we're all people, we're all imperfect people created in the image of God, and we're all on our own journey. And yeah, as Jason was speaking about, just more opportunities to explore vocations, because you don't see a lot of that, and a lot of young people are confused and they don't know all the options that are out there. And I think what needs to be recognized is that vocations can be within like a professional job that isn't in the church, because a lot of times, especially being a young Catholic, there's a lot of advertisement for different vocations in the church. But myself, I'm trying to figure out where my role is in living for God in my work eventually as a civil engineer, because I'm going to school for that right now. And so just recognizing where I can help people. And yeah, I think it's just important to realize that it's a journey, and it's not a perfect journey, and that God calls us in all different directions.
Awesome. Thanks. A lot of great conversation about ways in which we can make the conversation around vocation more accessible, and then also to make sure that we can kind of bring all of our journeys together so that we can walk together. So I really appreciate that. So you only have about 4 minutes left. So I'm wondering if we can do one last like rapid fire question. So maybe 30 seconds to a minute. I'd like to ask each of you to answer the question of what gives you hope. And I'm going to start with Renee this time.
Oh, what gives me hope? It's a lot of that's a lot to think about. It's not so much a rapid fire question. I think what gives me hope right now is I'm currently living on campus at St. Joseph's College at the U of A, and there is quite a vibrant Catholic youth community, which is giving me a lot more hope than when I lived in Lethbridge and going to Mass. I was one of the only young people there. So I think I'm definitely seeing that there are more young people who are getting into the faith. And I think that there are a lot of Catholic people in the media right now doing a lot of good work to bring people in, whether that be on YouTube, through podcasts, social media. That's just personally what I'm seeing.
Yeah. Awesome. Thank you. Brad?
Yeah, like Renee said, it's a lot to unpack in 30 seconds, but
Sorry.
that's okay. But yeah, similarly, what gives me hope is the community. Like I said, the roommates I currently live with are amazing people, and really build that community and that foundation. And yeah, I guess also like the option in the future to be able to share my faith through work as a kinesiologist or whatever I go on to do. I've also been thinking about going into elementary teaching. So, that option to share my faith and to grow that community kind of is what gives me hope.
Great. Thank you. Jason?
Maybe not.
Jason's gone.
He checked out.
I thought he was just watching really intently.
Yeah.
Maybe we'll wait a second.
Oh.
Esther, do you know if Jason's gone?
I think I'm back.
There you are.
There I am. I think one of the things that gives me hope is probably better Wi-Fi. I'm just kidding. Oh man, that's like the theme of my Wi-Fi life right now. No, like I think for me, one of the things that gives me hope is just a renewal and a refreshness of my faith. Being able to understand that being Christian is both understanding suffering hope and victory that comes at the end. So I think for me, that's a super important aspect in anything and in everything that I do.
Awesome. Thank you. So that is all our time for today. So I just want to thank all of you panelists for your time, and then everybody watching for inviting us here to have this conversation. So I appreciate you sharing your experiences as young Catholics in the church, and I hope that we can all continue to walk together. So have a great day.
Wow, what a wonderful experience of dialogue and conversation. Thank you so much to each of our panelists and to our moderator for sharing with us your thoughts and your feelings, the challenges, and everything that you experience with church. You've certainly given all of us much to think about and much to continue to dialogue with you about as we continue to be church walking together.